Carney arrived in China not as just another visiting leader, but as a state guest personally invited by Xi Jinping. That distinction matters. No Canadian Prime Minister has made a state visit to China in nearly a decade, and the timing of this invitation is telling. It signals that Beijing views Carney as a serious, reliable, and pragmatic leader, one who demonstrated resolve without theatrics in his handling of Donald Trump. This was not a courtesy call. It was a strategic reset.
First trip in a very long time, nearly a decade, so symbolism alone matters. But more importantly, it reflects a tactical recalculation by both sides, and it's actually China that has changed its policy more than Canada has. Canada's been trying to reopen frozen channels ever since Beijing shut them after Meng Wanzhou's arrest in 2018. Not a day I'm likely to forget. That became more urgent once Donald Trump returned to office and started destabilizing Canada-US relations. Meanwhile, starting last year, for similar reasons, China's own calculus changed, and now Xi Jinping wants to show that China can manage stable relations with G7 countries through a very stormy period in geopolitical rivalry, slowing growth, and rising global pushback against China's hugely problematic economic policies. Not having working ties with Canada looks bad for that narrative.
From Beijing's perspective, this visit is long overdue. China has been closely watching Canada over the past year. How Carney handled pressure from Washington, how he refused to be bullied by tariffs and threats, and how he continued to engage multilaterally rather than retreat inward. That matters to Beijing. In a world where Trump has turned unpredictability into a governing principle, China is actively seeking stable relationships with G7 countries. Canada under Carney fits that profile. This shift in China's posture isn't about restored trust. It's about strategic necessity. Let's be clear, Canada-China relations have been deeply strained for years. The arrest of Huawei executives, the detention of Canadians, trade retaliation, and growing mutual suspicion didn't just cool the relationship, it froze it. Carney's visit doesn't erase that history, but it reopens channels that had been completely shut, and that alone is significant. Diplomacy begins with dialogue, and for nearly a decade, that dialogue simply didn't exist at this level. Now it does. For Canadian canola farmers, this trip isn't abstract geopolitics, it's survival. China's tariffs on canola have had real, devastating consequences. Family farms have absorbed massive losses. Entire regions have felt the impact. No one expects immediate announcements, but the stakes are unmistakably high. China has been clear on one point. Tariffs can be revisited if Canada is willing to engage in an honest, pragmatic conversation. Carney understands this, and so does Beijing. But canola is only part of the story. The real pressure point in this relationship is Chinese electric vehicles. Canada imposed tariffs on Chinese EVs, partly under U.S. pressure, a move that quickly triggered retaliation against Canadian agriculture. The equation is now simple, but deeply uncomfortable. China eases tariffs on canola, Canada reconsiders tariffs on Chinese EVs. This is not an easy choice. Canada's auto sector is already under strain. Jobs matter, manufacturing matters. Any shift on EVs carries domestic consequences. But here's the deeper reality. Trump's tariffs have already battered Canada's auto industry. Washington's protectionism didn't shield Canadian workers. It squeezed them. Carney is now confronting a hard truth. Diversification brings opportunity, but it also comes with trade-offs.
Recently, Canada slapped a tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. China responded with a tariff on canola.
This is a high-stakes visit.
With a reset in the works, a word of caution as Ontario's auto sector struggles under Donald Trump's tariffs.
From China's perspective, it's simple. They will remove the tariffs if we remove tariffs on EVs. But I think from Canada's perspective, that decision has to take into account what kind of a future we want for our autos.
There's a reason Chinese electric vehicles sit at the center of the global debate right now. This isn't just about price. It's about scale, speed, and industrial capacity. China has built the world's most advanced EV manufacturing ecosystem, from battery supply chains to assembly lines, at a pace no other country has matched. As a result, Chinese EVs are competitive not only on cost, but on quality, range, and technology. That's why governments across Europe, the United States, and beyond are paying close attention. Chinese EVs are no longer a future threat. They are a present one, and that reality presents both a challenge and an opportunity for Canada. If Canada limits its engagement to simply importing Chinese EVs, the benefits are narrow, lower prices, more consumer choice. Useful but limited. The larger opportunity lies elsewhere, in manufacturing. If Canada were to move beyond imports and begin hosting Chinese EV manufacturing or assembly operations, the economic impact could be transformative. Tens of thousands of jobs, not just on factory floors, but across supply chains, logistics, research, battery production, component manufacturing, charging infrastructure, engineering, and design. Canada already has key advantages: abundant raw materials, a skilled workforce, and a clean energy grid capable of supporting large-scale EV production. What it has lacked is diversification of partners. This is where Chinese EV firms become relevant. For Canada, this would not be about replacing domestic automakers. It would be about building parallel capacity, strengthening the industrial base, reducing dependence on a single market, and positioning Canada as a serious player in the global EV transition. Of course, this would require safeguards, labor standards, environmental protections, and clear national interest rules. But done correctly, it could turn a trade dispute into an industrial strategy. And that's why this conversation is happening now. The global EV race isn't slowing down, and Canada has a chance not just to participate, but to influence where the next generation of manufacturing actually happens. For decades, Canada relied overwhelmingly on the United States. Energy, autos, agriculture. That model worked until it didn't. More than 95% of Canada's energy exports still flow south. Donald Trump made it painfully clear how dangerous that level of dependence can be. And Carney has been explicit: Canada needs options. China is not the solution, but it is part of the solution. As Canada's second largest trading partner, ignoring China isn't realism, it's self-sabotage. What makes this visit different is how Carney is approaching it. There's no talk of a golden era, no illusion of instant trust, no abandonment of Canadian values or sovereignty. This is disciplined engagement. Cooperate where interests align, hold firm where they don't, avoid illusions, avoid dependency. That balance is difficult, but necessary, and it's why China takes Carney seriously. Make no mistake, Donald Trump is the invisible presence hovering over this entire trip. His tariffs, his threats, his isolationism. Every move Carney makes, in Europe, in China, on the global stage, is about ensuring Canada is never cornered again. China understands that, and so does Trump. A Canada with multiple partners is a Canada that cannot be bullied. Success from this trip won't come in dramatic headlines or instant breakthroughs. There is no single deal that suddenly resets Canada-China relations, and expecting one would be unrealistic. Real success here is quieter, more structural, and more durable. First, success means restoring trust-based dialogue at the highest level. For years, Canada and China talked past each other. This visit reopens channels that allow disagreements to be managed before they turn into retaliation. Second, success means predictability. Canadian farmers, exporters, and manufacturers don't need perfection. They need stability. If this trip reduces the risk of sudden tariffs or surprise trade actions, that alone is a meaningful win. Third, success means measured progress on trade irritants, especially canola. Even incremental steps, reviews, frameworks, phased discussions would signal that relief is possible and that Ottawa is actively engaged. Fourth, success means building options without creating dependence. Carney isn't replacing the United States with China. He's ensuring Canada is never again vulnerable to pressure from a single partner. And finally, success means buying time. Time to diversify markets, strengthen supply chains, and reduce exposure to sudden shocks in an increasingly volatile global economy. Mark Carney's visit to China is historic, not because it solves everything, but because it acknowledges reality. The world has changed, trade has changed, power has changed, and Canada is adapting carefully, pragmatically, and deliberately. This trip is not about choosing sides. It's about making sure Canada always has one. This is only Canada. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.